Good evening. It is my pleasure to welcome you to Hotchkiss for tonight's Salisbury Forum. I'm Sarah Tennyson. I'm president of the Forum, and I serve alongside 12 wonderful volunteer board members who collectively make these events happen. There's a quote attributed to Heraclitus that is generally translated as, "No person ever steps into the same river twice, for it's not the same river, and you are not the same person." And tonight, I feel like we're stepping into the flow of a conversation that has been going on between Professor Akhil Reed Amar, you all, and the Salisbury Forum for 20 years. Each time we step in the river, it's slightly different. It's also an apt metaphor for the flow of ideas and constant change in the meaning we make and the actions we take around the Constitution. The questions Akhil addresses in the period 1840 to 1920 seem equally alive today. What kind of new nation had Americans brought forth? And what kind of more mature nation did they want to bequeath? What did America's Constitution already mean? And what, more or less, should it mean? And what, concretely, precisely, would Americans be agreeing to if they accepted as the very cornerstone of the American constitutional project the proposition that all men are created equal? So as well as learning how this idea of born equal evolved, with our focus on America's quincentennial, we are also, of course, very interested to hear where Professor Amar thinks we are today. And so there will be plenty of time for Q&A from the audience, and as usual, our people will be up and down in the two aisles there with roving microphones, so please raise your hand if you would like to ask a question. Akhil Reed Amar is Sterling Professor of Law and Political Science at Yale University. His work has won awards from both the American Bar Association and the Federalist Society, and he's been cited by Supreme Court justices across the spectrum in over 50 cases. He's the author of more than 100 law review articles and several books. He also now has a free weekly podcast, America's Constitution. After the Q&A, please stay in your seats where you are, because I will come back to share more about what's coming next at the Forum. And as we exit the auditorium, you probably saw on your way in that Akhil has generously given us copies of the book that you can take complimentary as you exit, and they're signed. So, to borrow language from the period and from the book, we shall not shilly-shally. Without further ado, please welcome Professor Akhil Amar.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you all. It's wonderful to be back with you. That reference, for those of you who haven't yet dipped into the book, is from chapter 1, which is entitled London, and some Americans are in London. We can talk about this, and one of them is a very prominent abolitionist. He gives a certain speech. It's the world's first anti-slavery convention, but before he gets the speech, his wife gets up and says, "Don't shilly-shally, Wendell." And we have to listen to our wives, of course. This is a book, this is a book about birth equality, male and female, as well as black and white. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the book today. That's my not so hidden agenda. As you've heard, there are free copies that await you. They're all signed. If you'd like me to personalize them, inscribe them in some way, I'll be around for that as well. I'll remind you perhaps of this at the end. There is a catch. The catch is, if you take a book, I want you to at least start to read it. It's a long book. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to read the introduction and the first chapter, which is called London, which has this reference to shilly-shally. And if you like it, please keep reading, and if you don't, find someone who you think might like it and give it to that person. Books need to be read. And this generation especially doesn't read books. I see a few youngsters in the audience, and that's wonderful. We're in an amazing school. My wife and I have 3 college-age kids. They don't read, their friends don't read the way earlier generations read, and this is a real problem for our republic. It's especially a problem if they don't read history, because the only thing that we Americans truthfully have in common is our common American history. We don't have race, or national origin, or religion, or first language, or politics, or geography. It's a vast country. So this is, other countries actually have a more of a cultural homogeneity. Not all of them, but many of them. We don't. What we have in common is our Constitution, we Americans, the Declaration of Independence, the ideas that link these constitutive documents, the stories, the narrative that link these core texts, the institutions that we have that go back to the 1770s, institution like Congress, actually. In 1776, the entity that adopts the Declaration of Independence is called a Congress. It's actually the Second Continental Congress. It will be different than the Congress under the Constitution, but it's called a Congress. And the Constitution is going to have entities like the Senate and the House and the Presidency, and they still exist. And if you don't understand how they work, then you have nothing in common with your fellow citizens, and, not to be too melodramatic, and we die. And my own view is, I'm megalomaniacal, but at least I'm honest. You have to read the books to understand where we came from. These books are not about myself, they're about us. But without the books, you don't know, any of you, the first thing about America. Truthfully, much of what you've been taught is not correct. Some of the same stuff that I was taught, and I'm going to get you to try to unlearn certain things that you've learned. You don't have to agree with me, but I think you need to understand what really did happen, and why and how. So let the games begin. Let's talk about, and this is volume 2 of a hoped-for 3-volume projected series telling the story of America over the last quarter millennium. Volume 1 is The Words That Made Us, America's Constitutional Conversations, 1760 to 1840, and some of you have heard me talk about that at a previous Salisbury Forum. That's the first 80 years, the first 40 years, and there's a pun there, the words that made us, the United States. We, the people, how we became a we, and we became a we by talking to each other. That's the first 80 years. How Americans come together and become Americans. Because in 1760, they're not Americans. They're New Yorkers and South Carolinians and Virginians, and they're not even talking to each other in 1760. How do they come together? That's the first 80 years. Now this book is the next 80 years. Born Equal. Remaking. See, that was the words that made us. Now this is a remaking America's Constitution, 1840 to 1920. And the key idea is birth equality. And we're going to talk about that. Black, white, male, female, Jew, Gentile, whether your parents are citizens or not. I just said something significant, by the way. So volume 3 will take the story, I hope, from 1920, where this book ends, the one that you can pick up on your way out as our gift to you. Volume 3 will be from 1920 to the present moment. Its tentative title is Earth's Best Hope, America's Constitution, 1920 to the present. So that's the project. 3 volumes telling you who you are, telling us who we are. And it's not about my politics. I'm going to tell you, for example, in this volume about gun rights and where they come from, less because of the Second Amendment and more because of actually the Civil War era. And there are gun rights actually in our story, in our constitutional tradition. It's not so much the Second Amendment. That's what you were taught. You need to unlearn that, but it is there. And I'm not a gun person. I've never owned a gun. So this is not the story of me. It's the story of us And you need to engage with it, because if you don't have enough in common with your fellow citizens to make the project work. Okay, so now the lesson begins. Let's start with, this is the 250th anniversary this year of the Declaration of Independence, indeed, and of American independence more generally. So, of course, America declares its independence on a very famous day, and that day is? Some people said July 4th, other people said July 2nd. Well, which is it? Who's sure that they're right? So which is it? It's July 2nd, that's true. The Second Continental Congress declares American independence on July 2nd, 1776. So then what happens on the 4th? No, it doesn't. Well, what gets printed? What gets printed? Because on July 2nd, there actually is a text that is adopted. It's so what happens on July 4th exactly? Maybe something does get printed. What? It's a Declaration of Independence. It's not actually signed that day. That's going to be in August. And the printing doesn't quite get published made public on July 4th. It's going to take a little time. But on July 4th, 1776, a document is agreed to setting forth the reasons for the Declaration of Independence of July 2nd. Now, why do you need to give the reasons? So what's the key? So what's the most important language in 1776, in this text that calls itself and that we call the Declaration of Independence? What's the language that you think in July 1776 is the most important? Yeah, that's what you say, and no one pays attention to that quite. Look at the newspapers of the era. Not one of them is published up and down the continent, capitalizes or italicizes, all men are created equal, or even we hold these truths to be self-evident, or consent of the governed. Not one of them, and they do capitalize and italicize a sentence. What's the sentence? I'll give you a hint. It's the same sentence as was adopted on July 2nd, 1776. What is the sentence? We the people isn't even in the document, it's in the Constitution. That's why you have to read the damn book. I know it's long. Okay? But if you don't know this stuff, and you're one of the most impressive audiences imaginable, wow. We the people is the Constitution. We're now talking, that's 1787 to 89. We're talking about the Declaration. What's the key sentence? We declare ourselves to be
free and independent.
That's the right answer. Raise your hand because I can't see who said that. I'm sorry, you're not, stand up. I can't see you.
I'm standing.
Oh, you're standing. Okay. Tell us your name.
Jonathan Costa.
Okay, that's right. These united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states. That's the key language. It's adopted on July 2nd. Richard Henry Lee makes the motion. John Adams seconds it. We're independent. That's the key. You can make, so why is that important?
Sovereign.
Yes. 1 or 13 sovereigns.
Yes.
Free and independent even of each other, states within us? The answer is yes, actually. We're NATO, we're 13. But what does it mean to be sovereign? What means we're no longer under George III, and Parliament has no authority over us whatsoever. So concretely, what does that, that means we're open for business, as in making deals. You can make a treaty with us, okay? And we're good for it. You can, we're not going back. We've crossed the Rubicon. This is no longer just a revolt or rebellion. We're a new thing in the world. And just so you understand, and the Declaration of Independence will elaborate the consequences. of that. So let me just, and this is the only language to repeat that's italicized or capitalized in the newspaper printings in July and August 1776. We, therefore, and in church often my pastor would say, what's the therefore, okay? The representatives of the United States of America, in general, Congress, assembled, appealing to the supreme judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare, here is the key, that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, okay? And now what does that mean? And that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. So the first thing this means is we can wage war. It's war before peace, actually. Don't screw with us, okay? The eagle initially has the 13 arrows in his right claw, you know, and the olive branch in the left one. This gets reversed later on. We are warlike people. Do not screw with us. We are now independent. That's actually July 2nd. So then why did you need all the other stuff on July 4th then, Professor? That sentence is the same as July 2nd. Here's why. Okay? Because it's going to come to war. The king has already, you know, begun war against us, and we are appealing to the supreme judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions. Okay? And we are, here's how the end, the people who signed this thing, pledging to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. People took honor seriously back then. And if we lose, the people who signed this, they're signing their death warrants. And these are very prominent, wealthy people. Benjamin Franklin is the most famous person in the New World. George Washington is, you know, not chopped liver. And he doesn't sign it, but he's actually fighting in the field, you see. And Franklin quips, you know, if we do not hang together, we will assuredly hang separately. That is, by the neck until we're dead. So they're committing treason, according to the British perspective. They have to join together. This will be decided by the God of battle. Okay? And we are appealing to the supreme judge of the universe for the rectitude of our intentions. Okay? We're invoking God. So all men are created equal. They're endowed by their creator. So now I've begun to tell you a little bit about why they have all this other stuff. So one, we have to explain to the rest of America what we're fighting for. Okay? Because wars are supposed to have purposes. War is not supposed to be just random violence. That's murder. That's mayhem. War, says Clausewitz, is politics by another means, which is trying, actually, you have a purpose, you announce it to the world, it has to be a just purpose if it's a just war. That's what popes forever have thought. This week's podcast goes all the way back to Pope Peter, and in the first episode I get up to the Reformation, but the second episode, which we haven't taped yet, will take you to the modern Pope Leo and the rest, and church and state issues. It's a free podcast. But wars are supposed to have purposes, and just wars are supposed to have a just purpose, and that's how you know if you win the war. You don't win the war by being the last army on the battlefield, or just by reducing some patch of ground to rubble. That's not winning a war at all. It's just reducing a patch of ground to rubble. It's accomplishing your war aim. So we need to explain to other Americans what we're fighting for, what victory would look like, you know, what's this all about. So the people who are asking to join us, Americans more generally who are making sacrifices for this, we need to explain to the world why we're doing this. Let facts be submitted to a candid world, says the Declaration of Independence. Especially we'd like to persuade the French. We're going to need their help. So the Declaration is giving reasons for what we did on July 2nd. To God, to the Army, to ourselves in America, to the world, to posterity, to us, 250 years later. That's what it's about. And now we get to some of those sentences that you all are focusing on. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they're endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, and we could go on. Okay? That's the core of our belief system. Okay? And here are all sorts of things that the king and his pals have done that are outrageous, that justify actually armed, not just rebellion and revolt, but independence, renunciation of the regime. These people are all born subjects of King George. And now this would be like, and that's a lifelong bond in their world. This would be like trying to divorce your parents. It's a very big deal, and you need to actually do not do this lightly, and you need to explain to everyone why you are doing this. Okay, and there's that language. All men are created equal. Now, what does that mean? So now I'm going to take you forward, because all that's 1776, and this book is 1840 to 1920. So there's this guy, his name is Lincoln, and here's what he says at Gettysburg. And this is the first paragraph of the introduction. That's why I want you to read the introduction and chapter 1. And I say, the words, they ring down through the ages. You know them, but you actually don't understand them, most of you, bluntly, truthfully. fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now, he's saying that in 1863, a place called Gettysburg, where they're putting thousands, tens of thousands of bodies in the ground. It's a funeral oration. In 1863, he's saying something happened 7 years earlier that I want you all to remember. 87 years ago. Is there anyone in this room that from personal memory can remember something that happened 87 years ago? I bet there isn't. You'd have to be about 93 and have a good memory. Maybe 91 or something. Okay? No one. Let the record reflect. He's not talking about the present moment. He's talking about history. He's an originalist. He's going back to America's origins and saying, here's what we have to remember. Now you do the math. 1863 minus 87. He says it more lyrically. 427. 420s. 80. The life of man is 70. Because he's lyrical. He's a poet. So 1863 minus 87. Carry the 1. Do the math. That's 1776. That's not the Constitution. He's going back to the Declaration of Independence. And he tells you that when he says, and dedicate to the proposition that all men are created equal. Those words do not appear in the Constitution. They're in the Declaration of Independence. And he's saying that's the cornerstone. It's not 1619, and we can talk about 1619. It's not 1787, which is the Constitution when it's drafted, in the same building, what we call Independence Hall. It's not 1789 when the Constitution basically goes, 1788 when it's ratified by the requisite number of states. It's not 1789 when it's launched and George Washington takes his inaugural oath. It's not 1789 when the Bill of Rights is proposed, or 91 when it's ratified. None of those. He says it's about 1776, and it's about all men are created equal. Now, he's got an interpretation. Other people have other interpretations. In the middle of this book, I'm going to give you 10 different ways. I'm being specific. 10 different ways of understanding those 5 words. All men are created equal. It's a deeply contested proposition in American history. We're still debating it. Lincoln embraces initially what I call interpretation number 7. I give you narrow ones to increasingly broad ones, and I'll tell you, I hope before the end of today, what that's all about, what proposition 7 is, but time for some learning and unlearning. Okay, who writes those words in 1776? You're going to say, yes, the right is Jefferson among others. Most people say Jefferson. Okay? Yes, but John Adams is right next to him, and so is Ben Franklin. And if you just think that it's Thomas Jefferson, wow, you're going to get a lot of things wrong. Because you're going to focus on Virginia, and Virginia never ends slavery, and Jefferson never frees the slaves, and he's a total hypocrite. Read Volume 1, okay? The Words That Made Us. I don't introduce him in that volume until about page 450. Here's what I say from memory. People lie. Politicians lie more than most. Thomas Jefferson lied more than most politicians. He lied to his constituents. He lied to his friends. He lied to Washington. And he lied to himself. And then I say, and he was also a pretty impressive guy. Okay, both might be true. Okay, so if you think it's Thomas Jefferson and Virginia, you're going to get a lot of things wrong. Because it's actually the Continental Congress, but right next to him is John Adams from Massachusetts and Ben Franklin from Pennsylvania, and that's important for a reason I'm now going to explain. This is the introduction. Read it, or else don't take the damn book. You know, that's the catch. You have to read the introduction. If you want to hear the audio version, the introduction is read by my friend John Mulaney. He doesn't do the whole book, but wow, he does a good Lincoln in the introduction. He's a great actor, and he's very serious too. He's a comedian, but he's serious. So, here's what the introduction says. That immediately, see, it's conceived in liberty, not in slavery, says Lincoln. It's a continental project, a new nation brought forth on this continent. So he's thinking continentally, and we can talk about what secession is all about, and those maps are actually relevant. The maps in the book, they're in the middle, they're in color. If you just do nothing else, if you go to a bookstore and you look at those 8 pages of color maps and you don't want to read the book, I failed. Okay, because they're amazing, and I'll tell you what those 2 maps in particular, that's the first page of maps are all about, brought forth upon this continent a new nation. And if you study this with care, you'll actually understand why we don't need Canada, and we never have, okay? And there's a reason that this map looks the way it does, okay? Now, Panama Canal is a little different. We could talk about the Straits of Hormuz. We could talk about Greenland. We could talk about a lot of things. America's about maps. It's the law of the land, and we could talk about all of that. Okay, back to conceived in liberty, not slavery. Here's the point. How many of you have heard of the 1619 Project? Raise your hand. So most of you had, you know, your Wokesters, read the New York Times and all of that. And you're going to have to unlearn some stuff. Because 1619 is not that big a deal in the world. It's when old world slaves first arrive in what will become the United States of America. It's not yet. It's a Spanish ship. It's coming to Georgia, which doesn't even become a colony, a British colony, until 1754 or so. So slavery and forms of unfreedom exist in all the world, pretty much in every era. Asians are enslaving other Asians, Africans, other Africans, Native Americans, other Native American tribes, the Aztecs, practiced slavery, for example. In what's modern day Eastern Europe, people are enslaved, that's why they're called Slavs. Okay? So, the ancient world had the idea of freeing individual slaves. That's Charlton Heston in Ben-Hur. That's Zero Mostel in A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. That's the Old Testament. That's the New Testament, freeing individual slaves. Here's what the Old World did not have. The idea of ending slavery. Not abolition, actually not emancipation or manumission, freeing slaves. Abolishing slavery as a system. The Old World did not have that idea. Who generates the idea of, and where and when, is the idea of abolishing slavery. What's the first place in the world that actually abolishes slavery? Extra credit if it's actually doing it democratically. Holland, no. I heard Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, I heard. Vermont, I woke up this morning in Burlington. I'm glad you're, what would most people say? They'd say actually Britain in 1833, don't you believe them? Okay, chapter 1 is called London. The world's first abolition society is formed in Philadelphia in 1775. Yay, Quakers. And immediately after July 4th, 1776, in that same building, which we call Independence Hall, Ben Franklin, in that same hall, will preside over a state constitutional convention, which will adopt a state constitution for Pennsylvania in 1776. Here's how it begins. All men are born equally free and independent. And within 4 years, those words will be cashed out in a state statute that promises, it will take some time, be a gradual system, an end to slavery, abolition of slavery, not freeing individual slaves. That's Pennsylvania, 1776 to 1780. John Adams is there, next to Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson, and he's going to preside over a constitution in Massachusetts. I drove through Massachusetts this afternoon to get from Vermont to Hotchkiss. And Western Massachusetts, but there's a convention in Massachusetts in 1780. It's presided over by John Adams, and it says, here's how it begins: all men are born free and equal. And that language will be read immediately to end slavery in Massachusetts. Oh, and Vermont is going to be doing the same thing, and a whole bunch of other New England states. That's the world's first abolition project. In the North, in America, the Brits haven't done anything like that. Don't you believe that stuff? Okay? Dunmore is freeing. How many have heard of Dunmore's proclamation? Okay, some of you have heard about this. It's a nothing burger. It frees some slaves, but only the slaves of patriots, the rebels, not the slaves of the loyalists. And it's not abolition at all. And the Brits, even in 1833, they're only getting rid of slavery in the West Indies, not in my parents' part of the world, in South Asia. Don't you believe that oh, they have nice accents, Sarah. They do. It's so charming. But, okay, don't buy it. In my parents' lifetime, they're doing beastly things in the South, in South Asia. Even Churchill, read up about the Bengal famine, okay? And watch Gandhi again and see the Amritsar massacre. This is, my dad is still alive. He went to medical school in Amritsar. So, it's not the Brits, it's the Americans, and we don't even know that story. Our kids either know nothing at all, or they know only a few bad things, many of which aren't quite true. Like 1619. How many of you knew? Raise your hands high. And I'm not going to count it if you read my book. You know, God from that. But before reading my book, that the world's first abolition project begins in America immediately in July 1776. Raise your hands. So that's 1%, and well done. Anyone else? One person? So, 2, 3, 4. Okay, there are a couple hundred of you here. You don't, that's a big fact of the world. You need to know that to understand what America, at least at its best, has been from the beginning, in its origins. Okay? 407 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation on the continent, conceived in liberty, not in slavery, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. That's the key phrase. Liberty, not slavery. What does all men are created equal mean? Well, the founding, I said, it could mean many things. Here's what Lincoln says, because we're not all born equally tall, or equally intelligent, or equally wealthy. Here's Lincoln's reading of it. And there are many readings, but his is the one that wins. And he gets himself elected president, and it's the one that will, okay, so this is telling me to start to conclude. And then we're going to have a conversation. Everyone is equal, thanks Lincoln, in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In a just society, this is Euclidean, it's universal, around the world. No one in a proper society is born a slave, and no one is born a slave master. We're all equal in life, liberty, and property, because we're all humans. If I encounter in the wilderness a horse or a dog, a wild horse or dog, I can capture it, I can tame it, I can make it my own, I can sell it, I can breed it. If I were a certain kind of person I'm not, I could kill it for food, for fur, for fun. But I can't do that to a fellow human being whom I meet in the field, because human beings are not tameable beasts of the field. That's Lincoln's idea. We're not equal in all sorts of other respects, but in freedom, in a just society, everywhere. He's mathematical, he's Euclidean. It's a universal birth equality idea that we're all born equally free. All men, says so it says the Massachusetts Constitution, are born free and equal. By the time Lincoln gets to the presidency, 15 of the 19 free soil states have provisions like this in their state constitutions. And there are 19 free soil states. The South actually isn't doing this. The North is. That's the first abolition movement in the world, way before Britain in 1833. But then Britain does it, and the South is now lagging behind because South Carolina isn't doing this, and they're very defensive and embarrassed about this. Deep down, you don't want to admit it, and we're going to have a civil war over this, because the South goes one way, the North goes a different way on this. And then we come to a different equality idea. It's not quite universal and Euclidean. It's an idea that if you're born in the United States and under the US flag, in technical legal terminology, subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, and you are born an equal citizen, whether you are black or white, male or female. This is a story about Elizabeth Cady Stanton and women who basically say at Seneca Falls, all men, we hold these truths to be self-evident, all men and women are created equal. If they wanted to say race, they could have said race. They said in the 15th Amendment. It's a deeper idea than that, but it's narrower in the 14th Amendment, because it's only about people born in the United States. People like me who are lucky enough to be born on this side of the line. People who were born on the Canadian side of the line to Canadian parents, they're not U.S. citizens. Okay, so it's not universal, but it's not just you're free, you're an equal citizen. It's a narrow idea, and it comes about because of the Civil War. I'll tell you exactly how, maybe in the Q&A, if you're interested. And this is where the birthright citizenship idea comes from. So we get rid of slavery everywhere, immediately, universally, without compensation in the 13th Amendment. That was unimaginable in 1776, but that happens because of the Civil War. And that 13th, universal freedom, equally free, is going to lead to a 14th, equal, not freedom, but citizenship, but only for people born in the United States, and then eventually equal voting rights, black and white, 15th Amendment. Eventually, by the end of the book, it's a long book, equal voting rights, whether you're born male or female. That's the 19th Amendment. That's what the book is about. How we move from all men are created equal to 13th Amendment, abolishing slavery, equally free, 14th, equal citizenship, the 15th, equal voting for black and white, the 19th, equal voting, male and female. That's the arc of the book. There are 4 characters that I showcase. In The Words That Made Us, I highlighted the 6 great founders. You all know who they are because we're Americans. If I just said Family Feud, we played this game before last time, just to remind people who weren't there. If I say, name a key founder, you're going to say, just shout out the names. George Washington, John Adams, Ben Franklin, Jefferson, Hamilton, and Madison. Those are the big 6 by acclamation. You're Americans. So people wouldn't be able to answer this correctly in New Delhi or Moscow. Your first 4 presidents, Washington, Adams, Jefferson, and Madison, and your 2 geniuses, Franklin and Hamilton. Those are the founders. And those are the keys figures in my first book. And they agree sometimes and they disagree, but they're all, okay, this is telling me I really have to end. They're all dead white men. Well, of course they'd be dead, but white men, okay? Now, in a book about birth equality, I've got to tell you about people who aren't just white men. I have 4 characters, and they take me through the whole period from 1840 to 1920 narratively, because I want this book to be kind of readable, even though I'm telling you a lot about law. If you were doing it, who would your characters be? Frederick Douglass? I have to have Abe Lincoln, yes. You can't not have Abe Lincoln. Harriet Tubman? Harriet Beecher Stowe. I I do Harriet Beecher Stowe because Harriet Tubman is not literate, and I'm talking about a conversation. But so Harriet Beecher Stowe, people almost never nominate her, is the first woman in America to occupy center stage. Everyone is talking about her. First time ever. So before Beyonce, before Taylor, before Kamala Harris or Hillary Rodham Clinton or Eleanor Roosevelt, who are close to center stage. See, Abigail Adams has to be on the side, and so does Dolly Madison, so does Mary Lincoln, actually, but everyone is talking about Harriet Beecher Stowe. She sells like 3 million copies of that book. That book sells more copies than any book of Twain's or Emerson's or Melville's, anyone. Wow. She's America's first leading lady. She's writing about women who have slave babies ripped from their embrace. She's writing as a mother about mothers. She's epic, and I will introduce you to her in the book. So I got Harriet, I got Frederick, and I'm on a first name basis with them, and when you read this book, you will be too. This country produced amazing people, and you don't know them. And if you don't know them, then you don't know just how obscene it is on all sides of the political spectrum today. We created a Lincoln, and we picked him. No other country ever did anything like that. And what the hell is happening today? You need to at least understand. I'm not hallucinating when I'm telling you these are not my forebears, but we created an Abraham Lincoln and then picked him. We did. That's not fantasy. Abe, Frederick, Harriet, who else? Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Yes. She's fun. They'll all disappoint you sometimes. They're human. Okay. I've said now enough. I've already told you that birthright citizenship is a thing. If you want more on that, I have a brief. There's an amicus brief. You can read it. Just go on SCOTUS blog, and 3 clicks will take you there. Go to the Trump v. Barber case. I have 12 SCOTUS blog posts. SCOTUS blog is this website that you could read. They're very short, 500 words to 2,000 words. I have an op-ed in the New York Times about 8 weeks ago now. I have free weekly podcasts talking about all this, so I'll give you more details. Here's what I will tell you, actually, honestly. If you listen to the oral argument, it was obvious that the justices were actually paying attention to this. There were lots of amicus briefs filed, but truthfully, this one more than the others. The Solicitor General responded only to one amicus brief. It was the one I filed. So if you want to understand, what happened in oral argument, we have 2 podcast episodes. They're each about an hour and a half. One may be 2 hours. But we have you listen to the episode, hear the justices' little clips, hear the lawyers' answers, and then we comment on them. So if you want to know what happened on April 1st, no fooling, that was the day I was in the courtroom, you can listen to the podcast, you can read the blog post, you can read the briefs, you can ask questions about, what does subject to the jurisdiction mean, and what about birth tourism, and what about anchor babies, and what about this, what about that. So, but now we're reaching the point in our in today's event where you ask me questions, and I actually at least try to answer them. So, while we're waiting for that first question, see, geography is really important here. Lincoln explains on secession, you can't draw a geographically defensible border between North and South because he's from central Illinois. They've got a lot of dirt and a lot of sun, and they can produce corn, but you can't get that corn out without going down the Mississippi through New Orleans, and you can't get shovels and tractors and other things in without going up the Mississippi. And there's no defensible border between North and South. It's every bit as actually indefensible as the line between, let's say, Ukraine and Russia, or the line between, let's say, Germany and France. And so you can't, now happily, see none of this watershed. Mississippi is the center of everything. It's just the most amazing thing. We have the whole thing except for a tiny little bit of headwaters in Canada that no one cares about. So Canadians can breathe easy because we don't actually need them for this Mississippi Valley project, which is actually Lincoln's project and Andrew Jackson's and Stephen Douglas's and William Tecumseh Sherman's and Daniel Webster's. It's all in the book. But that's what those images are all about. See, America's borders, the top one is circa 1830, so they actually fit the watershed. You don't need the other stuff for the Mississippi watershed. So the question is, you know, I mean, California is maybe an interesting thing to have, but you don't need it. Texas, too. Don't tell that to a Texan, but you don't. So then the question is why we end up grabbing Texas and California. We'll read the book and you'll find out, give you a hint, it has something to do with slavery. Yeah.
So on your state map, just across the border from Pennsylvania and New Jersey, I learned during the pandemic something I never knew before, which was that women had the right to vote in the province or colony of New Jersey.
State, even after
around the time of the founding until about 1810 or 1815.
A few women. You had to be unmarried because you see, at a time when women are married, and there's no secret ballot. Okay, you can't have a view independent of your husband. You don't have any property independent of your husband. You have no will independent of your husband. At common law, the husband and wife are one, and that one is the husband. He can beat her to a certain extent. It's called the right of moderate chastisement. Today we would call it spouse abuse. So you're not going to be able to have women who are married voting because they would just be a second vote for the man. It's public voice voting. There were few unmarried women, femme sole, that is, never been married women, or widows. And they'd have to have met property qualifications. Many women don't have much property in their own right, in their own names. Clever lawyers can do things. They can create trust instruments and other things. It was a few in New Jersey, not very much, truthfully. And no one in the world before, no major self-governing society in the world really had widespread women voting, not ancient Athens or Republican Rome, or Britain or Switzerland or Holland. So now the question, in chapter 1, I tell you the story of the world's first anti-slavery convention. Chapter 1 is called London. The introduction is all about the Declaration of Independence and Gettysburg Address, and these state free and equal clauses. That's the introduction, and if you take the book, you have to read that. It's 15 pages. Chapter 1 is longer. It's called London. It's the world's first anti-slavery convention in 1840. The most philanthropic people in the world, egalitarian, the great reformers, the great crusaders. Some are religious, some are political, some are academic, some are just wealthy business people. Hundreds of them gather in the world's biggest metropolis, London, in 1840 to decide how to end the world's greatest evil, slavery. And on day 1, this is chapter 1, the first thing that happens is the men kick the women out. And the women are just a few, 8 or so, Americans. And Elizabeth Cady Stanton is on her honeymoon. She's not one of the elected delegates, no, but she's a fierce crusader, and she's annoyed. And so she says to another woman, Lucretia Mott, who's one of the 8, damn it, when we get to America, we're going to have our own convention. This is going to be called Seneca Falls, and they call for women's suffrage in 1848. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, they say. And she says that means equal voting, and even Lucretia is a little bit taken aback. She thinks like, wow, that's edgy. So that's chapter 1. Well, Quakers, aren't as interested in just political activity as being a moral voice. So Lucretia is actually a little doubtful. Thou will make. Actually, it's misquoted. Actually, Elizabeth misremembers it. She says, "Thee will make us look ridiculous." Okay. So I think she probably said thou. But now Chapter 1, though, she's on her honeymoon. The first paragraph is she decides that she's going to get married, and when she decides something, it's decided. So she tells Henry, and he says, okay. And they go off, because he's about to go off to this conference in London. And she figures if he goes off, maybe she's going to meet someone else. He's away for a long time, you know, I better lock him down now. And she goes with him. And his boss is opposed to women voting in the convention. His bride is in favor of women voting in the convention. What does he do? Oh, no historian until yours truly has ever actually figured that out and told the real story of the pickle that Henry Brewster Stanton is in his working honeymoon. And this is about women not voting everywhere, but in the convention. So I've given you now some reasons why, women voting is going to be tricky, because they've never voted anywhere before, and husbands control their wives, and there's no secret ballot, and they're not fighting for their freedom the way blacks are after the Second Emancipation Proclamation. So black men are going to get the right to vote before white women, and Elizabeth is not amused by this at all. Ignorant, this is her phrasing, illiterate, uneducated black men are getting the vote before Radcliffe and Smith educated white women. She didn't go to Radcliffe or Smith, she's very wealthy, very well educated, and she's annoyed by all this, but they're not fighting on the battlefront. So then the question is, how do they ever get the vote? You see, because when only men are voting, women can't vote themselves the vote. So how do they ever get the vote if only the men can do it? And I tell you about 8 different things that explain how woman suffrage eventually comes about. Where does it come about first in America? Because New Jersey is actually a little blip. It's not very much of anything. It's a few women, and it's not much of anything. Wyoming, that's correct. 1870 as a territory, 1890 as a state. What's the most important thing you need to understand about Wyoming? There are no women in Wyoming. There are 6 white men for every white woman in Wyoming. And the men are, this is a technical term, desperate. And they're not that interested just in discussing politics with women, just cards on the table. But they're so desperate that they say, if you come here, we will let you vote, and we'll give you equal pay for equal work. Wow. And which are the other states that are the first? There are 3 other states other than Wyoming. By 1890, by 1910, 4 states are letting women vote. Wyoming is 1, 1890. What are the others? Utah?
Arizona.
No, not yet. Colorado, and Montana's going to be soon, and Idaho. And these are 4 states where there are very low populations of women. And this makes sense when you think about it. Of the 9 states that have the biggest gender imbalance in America, in 1890, the 9 states, all 9 will be among the first 11 states to let women vote. And here's why. Because if the ratio is, see, if you let women vote in a place that's 50-50, and it turns out to be a disaster, you can't undo that, because the women won't let you undo it. You give women the vote when it's, 85-15, you change your mind, you can take it back. This is where the experiment is going to begin. What's the place in the world that first lets women vote? New Zealand. And the gender imbalance in New Zealand at that time is about 9 to 10, a 10% ratio, which is massive in the world. There's a 5%, 4% gender imbalance in China right now. It's going to be one of the biggest problems of the next 100 years unless Chinese men start marrying non-Chinese women. In Australia, which part of Australia first lets women vote first? And it's the Wyoming of Australia, Western Australia. But there are a whole bunch of other things. I explain all the factors. Okay, so states do it first and the sky doesn't fall, and other states eventually copy it. And politicians begin to figure out it's in their interest to support it for reasons I explained. And maybe the biggest thing of all is just changes in medical technology. 40% of babies died before age 5 in 1850. So you have to pop out a lot of babies. Okay? That is cut in half by 1920. You're going to have fewer babies. And that means you're not spending as much of your time just being pregnant and in childbirth, which is not actually all that safe. If you're spending less time in childbirth and you're dying less in childbirth and your life expectancy is increasing, your life is more like a man's. And so it may make sense to educate you, send you to college, because you may be going to be surviving your childbearing years. And we're going to have actually secret ballot. And we're going to have married women's property reform, so you have your own property. And we're going to get rid of laws that let men beat women. A whole bunch of things are going to need to happen before you get woman suffrage. I'm going to explain all those things to you. Oh, you're going to have a world war, and if other places in the world are letting their women vote, and this is a war to make the world safe for democracy, it's an embarrassment if we don't let our women vote. Wars and voting go together. Black men get the vote because they're fighting on the battlefield. And women will eventually get the vote in a kind of Rosie the Riveter, Avant la lettre story. They're part of the economic backbone of the World War I effort. 19-year-olds get the vote in my lifetime, in your lifetime, because if you're old enough to fight and maybe die in Vietnam, you're old enough to vote on whether we should be in that war in the first place. So I'm going to explain all that. I know it was a short question, but what you were really asking is woman suffrage is what you were really asking about, and I gave you, the big picture.
At what point do the concepts of equality get extended to the indigenous people?
So I do talk about them in the book. The words in the 14th Amendment are excluding Indians, not tax. And that's not all Native Americans, it's tribal peoples. If you are born of Cherokee parents in New Haven, Connecticut, you're born a citizen of the United States. And that was a question asked at oral argument, and the oral advocate for my side frankly kind of muffed it. She's a former student of mine, listened to the podcast episodes. I didn't in my brief muff it, and in the SCOTUS blog postings. If you are born in New Haven, Connecticut, under the American flag, you're an American. But there are certain enclaves, Indian land, that are not quite fully American soil. You have to be born under the flag. And if you're born in Cherokee, we would today say reservational land, white, black, green, brown, that's not born subject to the jurisdiction or under the flag. Okay? So we're still making treaties with the Native American tribes in the 1860s. So they're a different people in the world with their own territorial base. We stopped making treaties in the 1870s. I tell that story in the book. In 1924, this is going to be volume 3, there's a statute that says Native Americans are birthright citizens, whether born on enclaves or not. Could we actually do the next slide, please? No. Back to the, so just, yes, scroll up. So, yeah, that's an interesting one. And if you read the caption, if you scroll up just a little bit more, I'll tell you why we're reading this. Okay. The map maker pays close attention to the location of major rivers, mountains, and tribes, such as the Apache and the Sioux. As a U.S. recognized sovereign, Texas now has its own map color. This is, the Lone Star Republic. This is before the Mexican-American War. This is between 1836, which is Texian independence, and they adopt a Declaration of Independence, and I tell you all about that. This is between 1836 and 1846. So this map is actually 1839. Texas has its own boundaries. It's got its own color. It's a sovereign entity in the world. The tribes aren't quite. They're only quasi-sovereign. They don't have their own colors. They don't have their own borders. We can make treaties with them, but they're not allowed to make treaties with any other European nation, whereas Texas can make a treaty with anyone, so they're not quite fully sovereign. They're quasi-sovereign. You can read up about it in the book. there's a lot of nastiness on both sides, and it is not, in my view, quite the same as what black slavery is in America. What whites do to black slaves is very different. These are basically nations and quasi-nations warring against each other, and they're nasty on all sides. And they generally lost, and they lose most places in the world, indigenous peoples, whether they're talking about New Zealand or Canada or wherever. So there are people who are going to be, and who are trying to cancel me on the hard left on the Native American issue. And I'm unapologetic in telling you the history of the thing. They were never fully sovereign. They want sovereignty today. If they were sovereign, they could make a treaty with Putin tomorrow. That can never happen. If they were sovereign fully, they would sit in the United Nations. That will not happen. Georgia is not fully sovereign. That is the state. Mississippi is not sovereign. That's what the Civil War is about. Neither are the tribes. And you can see it here. Texas in 1839 was in fact sovereign. It could make treaties with whoever the heck in the world it wanted to. You can see it in the map if you're actually paying attention. It's the color and it's the boundaries. And elsewhere on this map, you'd have to blow it up a little bit. You could you'll see little things like say, Apache, Sioux. They are not fully sovereign. But I discuss this in pretty great detail in the book. How many of you know the story of the first Abraham Lincoln? So it's a complicated story. It's a nasty story. Oh, want to talk about what happened in the 1940s in the Holy Land? Oh, there's nastiness on all sides. The Haganah and the Irgun and the Stearns gang and all that. There's killing. My parents came from Punjab. There's nastiness on all sides. There's actually nastiness on all sides. So I'll actually read it to you. It's getting me canceled, but you need to know the actual history. So, here's actually the story of the first Abraham Lincoln. It's complicated. Even as a child, Abe knew, I'm on a first-name basis with him, that he existed in the world only because his uncle Mordecai, as a 14-year-old, had killed an Indian in a ghastly 1786 encounter. Abe's eponymous paternal grandfather, Abraham Lincoln, then in his early 40s, was laboring in a field near his wilderness cabin in Jefferson County, Virginia, now Kentucky. Indians from the woods shot and killed him by stealth. He was just planting, his field. And they're being dispossessed. I'm not blaming them. I'm just saying, wow, it's nasty on all sides. One Indian evidently aimed to scalp him, and presumably would have killed Mordecai's 8-year-old brother, Thomas, who was positioned next to Abraham's dead body. But Mordecai ran to the family cabin, fetched a gun, and shot the Indian dead. Young Thomas lived to sire Abe. A minute later, no Thomas, no Abe. Okay? This family story made a strong impression on young Abe, who was pointedly named for his slain grandsire. So it's very complicated on both sides. And it used to be the story that the whites were always right and the tribes were always wrong. That's not true. But the flip side is also not true. It's actually way more complicated than that. And read the book. And the reason I'm so dangerous to the hard left is, in case you haven't noticed, I'm not white. So they don't like the fact that I'm saying certain things, that are inconsistent with their political project, which I'm not on board with. We're all born equal, whether we're born Indian American or American Indian, whether we're born white or black or brown or green, whether we're born gay or straight, in wedlock or out of wedlock, male or female, to citizen parents or not. That's the deep Enlightenment idea, and truthfully, some of these tribal regimes, even today, see membership as defined by blood. And so do the Saudis, so do the Kuwaitis, and that's not the birth equality idea, truthfully.
60 years ago, I heard a justice stand behind a lectern like you and say, Congress shall pass no law abridging freedom of speech, and no one bought it. And he had all his originalist views and whatever.
His name was Hugo Black.
And his name was Hugo Black.
Hugo Black's pocket U.S., as if on cue, Hugo Black's pocket U.S. Constitution. The guy always used to carry a pocket Constitution with him at all times. What a weird guy would do that. So, someone who takes the Constitution seriously.
Now, that said,
and hold on, it doesn't say Congress can make no law on speech. No law abridging even freedom of speech. It's the freedom of speech, and once you understand what the freedom of speech is, it's pretty close to an absolute, but you have to read my books. And explain to you actually why that is.
Civil War.
Yeah, what?
I'm only up to the Civil War, but I'm
Okay.
getting it.
So Hugo Black was a very, very impressive, he is the most important justice on the Supreme Court in the 20th century. He's the driving intellectual force of the Warren Court. That's not what you're taught. That's not what they teach you at Harvard. They teach you the Harvard people were the driving intellectual forces. And he was picked from the sticks, from Alabama, only 2 years of education, but self-taught, like Abe Lincoln. And he's a very important person. Most of the things that the Warren Court did, he did first in dissent. He's FDR's first appointee to the court. Don't underestimate Hugo Black. He was not perfect. No one is.
And I don't underestimate him, but I do now go to the first sentence of the 14th Amendment, and I recognize your enthusiasm and your writing and your book. But what,
there was a but.
What is the chance that things will get carved around the edges the way freedom of speech has been carved around the edges?
Well, I don't know. It's the freedom of speech, and actually we protect the freedom of speech remarkably robustly in America. Much more than any time in American history, and much more than pretty much anyone in the world. It's pretty darn impressive, and if it weren't, I'd be really at risk, because every day I get up and go against the President of the United States, and I'm still, at liberty. And that's not that hard a question, in fact. So what I will tell you is, let's just take the words, because you aren't reading them. Okay? Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech and of the press. Shall make no law abridge. Now read the 14th Amendment. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States. Shall make no law abridge. They're building on the First Amendment in interesting ways, but they're applying it against states. Okay? Because the original Bill of Rights came out of the American Revolution, and the bad guys are the British, and we're worried about a strong national government replicating this central tyranny, so we have limits on central power. In the Civil War, the states have misbehaved, and now we have a second Bill of Rights that's going to limit states and localities, and we're borrowing from the language of the First Amendment. Shall make no law abridge. It's now states rather than Congress. But you guys don't read your Constitution, the way some of you might read your Bible or Torah or whatever, or backwards and forwards your favorite song or poem. And there's a lot of things to be squeezed out of even a word like the. Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. What is that? What is the freedom of speech? Well, read Alexander Meiklejohn, read Akhil Amar, and we'll try to make sense, we'll offer the best account of what can be said for Hugo Black, who was not just a country bumpkin, but a very, very sophisticated theorist, in fact. Impressive. 2 years of education at the University of Alabama, got dismissed by the Mandarins, and so did Lincoln, because he wasn't formally educated.
My wife and I went to Yale Law School 60 years too early, apparently. And frankly, I've learned a lot more about the Constitution tonight than I did in the courses at Yale Law School at the time. I'd be really interested in how you see the current presidency in light of the Constitution of, that's probably your third book.
Yes. The word Trump appears many times in volume 3, which I'm working on.
I'd be very interested in your reaction to the current presidency.
And I can't see you, so could you just stand up so I can just see you?
He's a big man.
Great. Is your wife here with you?
He's sitting next to me.
Could you stand up too? Because you're pretty amazing if you went to Yale Law School. Here you are.
At the time, there were 8 women in the class of 170 men.
So here are some of the women. You know, one is named, in that year, Ruth O'Brien. She recently passed away. You've heard of her son, Conan. Another one is named, actually, Ellen Mullaney. Could you just actually, up front, just delete the slides and just go to, just minimize them. There's my friend John Mullaney. He's the product of 2 Yale Law School graduates. Chip and Ellen Mullaney, and there weren't very many in that class. He ended up, it's interesting, Conan O'Brien, you know, mother Yale Law School graduate, John Mullaney, you know, mother and father Yale Law School graduate. So, and these people are funny, but they're seriously funny, and they're serious too, and Abe Lincoln was as well. So Trump discussed. Wow, that's a huge topic. Listen to the podcast episodes. There are 5 years worth of them. We talk about all sorts of issues. Here's the thing. I was in the courtroom on April 1st. He was in the courtroom too. First time a sitting president had ever gone to a Supreme Court oral argument. It was said, I'm short, I couldn't see him. I was kind of back on one side, he was in the front on the other side, so I couldn't really see him. But when he walked in, we didn't all stand up. It wasn't like the State of the Union, Mr. Speaker, you know, the President of the United States, and everyone stands up. John Roberts didn't announce his presence. None of the justices said anything about him. Even his own lawyer, Sauer, didn't say, Mr. Chief Justice, Mr. President, and may it please the court. He was just like anyone else. And wow, there was something impressive about it. He's entitled to be there. The case actually bears his name. It's Trump versus Barbara. Anyone can go to the Supreme Court. It's open to the public, but especially if you're a party, a named party, you might want to see what they're saying about you and your case and watch your lawyer in action. So that was great, but he's no more than any other citizen of the Republic. And in principle, Lady Justice is holding the scales, not being indifferent to the names of the parties. And this question is, which argument has more weight? It's never 100-0. There's always something you can see on the other side. Birth, tourism, anchor baby, blah, blah, blah. Okay, there's something, and I talk about all this in the brief, what the answers are. Here's the thing. I'm going to make a prediction here. My side's going to win. Not just my side. The arguments I made in that brief are going to be the ones that the Supreme Court, I believe, will actually embrace. Listen to the oral argument, and that's because they're better on the law. I'm a nobody from nowhere, 5'7", 140 pounds, soaking wet. But one guy with the right legal argument can prevail against the most powerful person in the world, and they didn't ask there, how much money have you given to my campaign? Which political party are you affiliated with? How many troops do you have? Stalin once said to the Pope, how many divisions does the Pope have? That's not the currency of the realm, the coin of the realm in a court. The Supreme Court is the least dysfunctional of all our branches of government. It's not perfect, but it was pretty inspiring to see that they were actually just following the legal arguments. They smacked him down, but good, in the Trump tariff case. People in the Republican Party, good for them. And by the way, the guy who won that case, Neil Katyal, my former student, argued it and won it, but the guy who came up with the theory, who won the case, I'm being honest, listen to past podcast episodes. Adam Liptak said this in the New York Times, is another just lawyer with an idea. His name is Vic Amar. He's my punky kid brother. And he actually wrote the amicus brief in that case that won the Trump immunity case. If you go to SCOTUS blog, you can read what the argument is. I'm not going to give it to you today if you listen to our podcast episodes. So that's what's amazing about law at its best. It's actually about what the Constitution really does say, what the history really does show the most powerful man in the world was in the courtroom and he couldn't tell them that they must do his will. Wow. And he's right on some things. I think he gets to fire Rebecca Kelly Slaughter because she works for, actually, the executive branch, bluntly. She's my friend. She's my former teaching assistant. She's going to lose that case. When she loses, she's going to come on the podcast. She's agreed to do it and tell you her side of the story. But he deserves to win on some things, and he deserves to lose on other things. I voted against him 3 times. I hope, I won't have to do it yet again, because I don't think he's really should be probably on the ballot the 4th time. But it's such a big question, Trump discuss. The podcast, actually, if you're interested, it's free. And I hope you actually give it a shot. It's an hour and a half every week, but I promise it'll make you smarter. Time for one more, from someone who may be a little bit younger.
I'll have to make this one a little short.
Tell us your name, please.
My name is Alessandro Araujo. I go to Hotchkiss. Right now I'm taking. So.
And where are you from?
So I grew up in Washington Heights in New York City, but now I live in Elmsford and like around the White Plains, Westchester area.
And by the way, have you seen the book, The Words That Made Us?
I don't.
It's dedicated to Lynn Miranda, who's also from the Heights, and his spouse Vanessa Nadal, and 3 other people. But anyway.
So my question is connected to, like, you spoke about history and then its relationship with the Declaration of Independence, and then how that connects to the powers and restrictions provided by the Constitution briefly. Mm-hmm. My question is, how heavy of a hand does history have on the history of America, have on the constitutional analysis?
Yes.
And so, what is it right now? Well, how is it treated? How is history treated in the context of, or how's the Constitution treated in the context of history? And how do you think it ought to be?
So I'm an originalist, meaning that I care about what the text of the Constitution said and originally was understood to mean. We made certain promises, and we should keep those promises. My argument for birthright citizenship is we actually agreed to something after the Civil War, that we are all born equal citizens. And let's look at the words. It doesn't just say race. It could have, 15th Amendment does. It says equal, everyone born in the United States, and it's building on these state constitutions. You see that I said people are born free and equal. That same language, born free and equal, in Massachusetts, that was used by Margaret Marshall in a case called Goodrich to guarantee same-sex marriage. That if you're born gay, you should have the same right to marry as born straight. Now that's a little edgy because maybe they didn't quite agree to that in 1780, but only because they didn't understand the argument, though, that people are born gay. That was a concept that they didn't have. Today, that's maybe what the best science tells us, is that people are born with sexual dispositions, tendencies, orientations. I can't be in anyone else's body, but for me at least, it seems that I was born this way. I'm with Gaga. I didn't choose to be straight. My body just reacts to certain stimuli, and I discovered this. When I see a certain kind of person, when I was, in adolescence, my heart went pitter-patter, and my blood rate, I got butterflies in my stomach, and I started sweating or something, and I was reacting to some bodies and not other. But I didn't choose that. That's just like how I was born. Okay, so if you're born straight and you can marry, then if you're born gay, you should be. But the idea is a history idea, is what text. You're born equal. So I'm an originalist. I think we'll win the birthright citizenship case because it really said people, for example, who are born children of slaves, they're going to be citizens, even though some of those slaves were here illegally. They were technically illegal aliens. They were smuggled in violation of an 1807, 1808 statute. And everyone knew that at the time because Lincoln hanged a slave trader. It's in the book. And every year Lincoln actually asked Congress to strengthen the laws against slave piracy so they knew there were illegal aliens in America who were slaves, and they said their kids are going to be American citizens regardless. Today, in New York City, I'll give you at least even odds that there's someone in a cargo container today who's being smuggled in, sexual slave, from Thailand or China, whatever. That's today. That's happening still. And they say it doesn't matter who your parents are. It matters that you're born in the United States and under the flag, subject to the jurisdiction, not tribal enclaves, different flag, not an embassy, different flag. Okay, so I think you need to know your history, and I think the history is relevant. People who think that call themselves originalists. They're not just conservatives, they're liberals too. I say in this book, and here's I guess a good point to end, Sarah. She's getting a little worried, okay. Okay. That the greatest, I told you Hugo Black is a very great originalist. Maybe the greatest judicial originalist. Robert Bork was my teacher. I learned a lot from him, but he didn't know any history at all. He didn't. Scalia knew no history. He didn't. Okay? Hugo Black did. And the greatest originalist of all time, I believe, was Abraham Lincoln. And he's beginning just in that 407 years ago, our friends, he's going back to history, 87 years. He's saying, let's remember what we agreed to, that all men are created equal. We didn't live up to it, but that was our moral North Star, and we have to actually get there eventually. And why did they say that? They didn't say that. They didn't need to say it in order to declare independence. They did that on July 2nd. They needed it because they were a moral people appealing to the supreme judge of the universe for the rectitude of their intentions, their creator. They were about to wage a war, and they thought they couldn't do that unless they got straight with the Almighty, and they were actually putting on paper that they actually think that no one is born a slave and no one is born a slave master, that human beings are not tameable beasts of the field. That's history. And he persuades other people because he's actually a very good historian. He's a nobody from nowhere. Less than a year's formal education in his whole life, but damn, he knows the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. He knows history. He knows the story. He gives a great speech at Cooper Union that's all about history. He says, this founder was opposed to slavery, and this one, and this one, and this one, and the first thing that they do is actually prohibit slavery in the Northwest Territory, and the states are getting rid of slavery. He tells that story. I'm getting it from him. So, history is not the unique province of conservatives. We can all claim it. Some of the greatest originalists of all time have been liberals. Hugo Black, Franklin Roosevelt's first appointee to the court, Abraham Lincoln, most of all. And I want you to know the history. Now, if you don't like it, you can, and your generation can change the Constitution. You're allowed. Earlier generations thought things in the Constitution sucked. Slavery existed in the States. They thought that was wrong. They amended it with a 13th Amendment, with a 14th Amendment, with a 15th. Women still aren't voting. We added a 19th Amendment. We don't have a formal ERA. I think it's implicit in the 14th Amendment, but your generation could add that. I would applaud you if you did. But you need to know history. You asked one final thing, which is, how do the judges think about this? I think increasingly they are turning to history, and I want them to, because I know them pretty well. Some of them are pretty conservative. I don't want them just consulting their political instincts or their gut. I'm not sure, if you're a somewhat liberal audience, you don't want them doing that either. You want them actually, because left to their own devices, they might say, well, we like Trump. Some of us, we voted for Trump. He put 3 of us on the court. And my friend Sam Alito, he's not even one of the 3, but, I think he likes Trump. And I love him, but I think he does. I don't want him to judge based on that. I want him to judge based on the history. You look at the 14th Amendment, it says what it says, there are reasons why. I'm hopeful that it's possible even all 9 justices, some because of the 14th Amendment, some because of the federal statute that I did tell you about, the 1952 statute, it's possible all 9 will say, this Trump executive order is just made up. And some of them will do it, at least 7, I think, based not just on text, but on history. History was important in the tariff case. They said, look, the American Revolution was no taxation without representation. Only the House of Representatives can authorize a tax. This is a tax. The House hasn't clearly authorized it. That's history. So, and they smacked down a sitting president of the United States on his trademark piece of legislation. They did something similar when they said presidents can't just change the rules of censuses. They can't just send National Guard people anywhere they want. So they're not perfect. Wow, I thought they've rendered some really bad decisions of late. Ex-presidents are immune from criminal prosecution. No, the Constitution doesn't say that. So they're going to break your heart sometimes. They're going to get it wrong. But if you think history is relevant, there's actually a fact of the matter. You can see you actually did it. You made a mistake. History said this, and you did that. But if history isn't actually an important guidepost, then they get to do whatever they want. Now, there was a Supreme Court that just made stuff up. It was the Dred Scott Court. It just made stuff up, and Lincoln runs against it, saying, you just made all that up. And he called it, and he's so good with it, he's so funny. He called this an astonisher in legal history, he coined a word. And he persuaded his fellow Americans because they actually could read the Constitution. He was elected because there were constitutional debates in the middle of nowhere, Illinois, and thousands of people came and just listened to the constitutional debates, and we picked a president of the United States. 2 years later, there's a rematch between Douglas and Lincoln, largely on the basis of constitutional arguments by an impressive constitutional lawyer, making arguments from history. I'm not hallucinating. That actually happened, and I want you to know that it happened. Can it happen again? That's, in the end, up to your generation. I do think justices on the Supreme Court are taking history more seriously than was probably 20 years ago.
Before you go, thank you all for being here, because without our audience there is no forum, so thanks to you. To our partners at Hotchkiss, thank you very much for hosting us tonight. Thank you. And for those of you who so generously support us with donations, we are always grateful. Our next Salisbury Forum is on September 18th at Housatonic Regional Valley High School. Our speaker will be Dr. Miguel Cardona, who will discuss the importance of public education and higher education in today's climate. Dr. Cardona served as the 12th United States Secretary for Education. If you enjoyed tonight's event, please consider supporting us with a donation. And as you exit, please take your complimentary copy of Akhil's latest book, and he will be outside available if you would like that inscribed. It is already signed for you. So thanks again for being here, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.